Did you know that when you ask leaders across the world, 95% of them say that they are very self aware? And that when you go into detail with them and you tell them about what self awareness actually is, it turns out that only 15% really are self aware. I find that fascinating, and that's why this is exactly what Abha and me are going to talk about in today's episode of Who Do You Want to Be? Welcome, Abha. It's amazing to have you here with me. How are you today?
I'm really good. And now I'm actually wondering if I know what self awareness is because I feel that I am very self aware. But since everyone seems to feel that, but they actually don't know what it is, I'm very curious to know whether I actually know what it is. So I'm super excited to be talking to you about this because the truth is, being aware is the first step towards changing anything. Right? But then if we don't actually know what self-awareness is for real, you're not going to change anything. So enlighten us. What is self-awareness and what is it that we get wrong?
Well, I'm happy that this already sparked curiosity, Abba, but I'm going to disappoint you for a second because I'm not going to make it that easy to just reveal what self-awareness is. Much rather, I am super curious now to understand how you would define self-awareness.
For me, I link it back to the way I'm feeling because usually the way I feel impacts how I act. So if I'm acting in a way that I don't feel good about how I'm acting, I try and think about why am I acting this way? It's got to do with how I'm feeling. And I try and just sit with that feeling and then try and work out why I'm feeling that so that I can act on it. And I think I'm very aware at all times of how I'm feeling. I may not have control over how I'm feeling, but I'm very aware of how I'm feeling. And sometimes I act before I recognize how I'm feeling. And that's when things trigger. And that's when you can have a fight or an argument or start yelling at your kids, for example. But either way, I realize it quite quickly, whether it's before I actually behave in the way I shouldn't behave, or whether it's immediately after. Usually, I would say it's 50-50. 50% I feel it and I know that something is not right and I stop myself. So for me, that's I'm being self-aware. But 50% of the time, I can't control it. But then the minute I behave in a certain way that is not aligned with how I want to behave, I become suddenly self-aware that I shouldn't have done that. And then that's what defines self-awareness as in layman terms.
That's a fantastic start, though. I know many, many people who are not that understanding of their own emotions, beginning with not being able to name a specific emotion. Yes, we all know what happiness is, what joy looks like, what sadness looks like, anger, frustration. But apart from that, many, many people are not really able to name, let's say, 20, 25 different emotions. And this is a very important part of self-awareness to begin with. Which emotion exactly is showing up for me right now? There are so many different parts within, for example, feeling good. But feeling good alone, what exactly makes you feel good? What are you feeling good about? How does feeling good show up for you? So feeling good for you could be, I'm excited, I'm enthusiastic, I am curious, I am looking forward to what is happening now, whatever that could be. But you can label these emotions under this umbrella of feeling good in many different ways to begin with. And I absolutely loved what you were saying about when it comes to these triggers. Emotions as triggers for the behavior that is coming immediately after. And I honestly salute you for the fact that you say oftentimes 50% is what I think you said. You're able to then control the behavior, the reaction that is following to this emotion, which is really, really great because triggers are an extremely important part of self-awareness. First of all, understanding where is this trigger coming from? What's the root of this trigger? But then also, how often does this trigger actually show up? Many of us are not even aware of how often a trigger shows up per day. When we then start to pay detailed attention to this, we might be really surprised that the number that this trigger is showing up for us is much higher than the number we actually thought of initially. And then, of course, when it comes to triggers, the question is, now that I am aware of this trigger, what can I do about it? How can I now, and this is what you mentioned about awareness being the first step, how can I change my trigger into something that serves me better, something that I don't necessarily need to counteract on, but something that I can just flow with, where I'm saying, okay, I know that this is going to trigger me, but I will be okay with the reaction that is following on this. So just to summarize this, what you mentioned around emotions is one very important part of self-awareness, but it's only one. Another part, and then I'm going to hand this back to you, is the cognitive part. The stories that we're telling ourselves in our heads, the beliefs that we're holding, the biases that we have, potential stereotypes we believe in, prejudices that we have. That's another part of self-awareness. So giving this back to you, Abha, what do you think about your cognitive awareness of these things?
Well, it's interesting because obviously I've not thought about it in as depth as you're explaining it, because this is not something I do. But what's coming up for me is like what you said before about the emotions, people can't even name them. That is probably one challenge. And the second challenge I would feel is that if you name them, if you're able to name them, do you want to accept that you're feeling that way?
Mm.
Do you know? And that maybe is related to your cognitive part of it, because, for example, maybe I see someone very successful on YouTube or Instagram, for example, just hypothetically, and I feel angry, or I feel jealous, or I feel envy. Will I admit that that's how I'm feeling? Because actually, my personality is I want everyone to succeed. There's enough to go around for everyone. So my brain will tell me that you can't feel jealous, you can't feel envious, because you're trying to live in this world of abundance. But sometimes you may not feel that way. And maybe that comes with how you're brought up, how you're trained to believe things, or like you said, your self-limiting beliefs. So I guess it's all intertwined, right? And it's actually very complex. I feel like now that we're talking about it, it's not just I feel this and that's why, and this is what I'm going to do, and I'm going to be okay. Doesn't work like that, right? And also, like, what's also coming up for me is how two things can be true at the same time. Like, maybe I do feel a bit envious, but I'm also happy for that person. So there are two completely conflicting emotions that maybe you can't balance, which is also why you react. So it's all, when you think about it, it's actually very complex. And that's why I guess a lot of us who are not in this space don't end up thinking about it unless we are pointed in that direction, or we get the guidance of someone like you to point us in that direction so that we can actually get past it.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely love what you said around this combination of emotions and thoughts that we're having, because of course, ultimately you can say one begets the other. I have a specific belief in something that triggers an emotion. That emotion again triggers a specific behavior. Or for example, I am feeling, let's take your example of envious, and then I am immediately going back into my belief. No, I'm not someone who is feeling envious. Why am I feeling envious? This is so irritating right now because it's not a feeling that I am welcoming. And this leads to the next thing that you were mentioning as well. How accepting am I of these emotions? And ultimately, the goal for emotion, or the goal of emotional intelligence, is also really to, yes, acknowledge that you have this feeling, accept that you have this feeling, but then also allow it to pass. Don't hold it back, because any emotion that we're suppressing will come back later with a bigger force. until we are allowing this emotion to pass. And this is another part of self-awareness, understanding how capable, how allowing am I of letting these emotions happen, but then also letting them pass and move on, rather than being irritated by envy, for example, but not allowing it to pass through because I'm thinking, I am not an envious person. This emotion right now doesn't make any sense for me, so I am putting it into the background. It's very likely that at some very related point, that envy will come back even stronger than you experienced it in this first moment. So that's another part of self-awareness. And the third part of self-awareness is not just for you to understand how you feel inside yourself, how you think, what your patterns are, but understanding how are others perceiving me. When I am, for example, entering a room and I'm about to give a keynote speech, I might know how I'm feeling. I might be a little bit nervous, but I'm still confident because I am looking forward to this as I know very well what I'm going to talk about. But how do others perceive me when they see me getting onto the stage? What will they perceive when I start talking? So this is the third part of self-awareness. How
Yeah,
does the third part resonate?
it is very interesting because when we behave, when we act in general, we often do think, what will others think? And that also impacts how we behave or do the action we are out there to do. So for example, in your keynote example, like if I was doing a keynote and my mom and dad were there, I would be obviously super proud and happy that they're there, but also I would be like, I really want my dad and mom to be proud of me. So I want to make sure that everything is a certain way so that they are proud of me. So the goal becomes more, how can I make them proud of me rather than delivering a really good keynote? Whereas technically they're both connected, but then you kind of think, especially when people are close to you, you think, I know how my dad thinks, or I know how my mom thinks. They wouldn't like it if I said it that way, so I'm going to say it this way. Do you know what I mean? So it's just an example. So it's all, when I think depending on who you're interacting with, it does change the way you behave, because you, it's very hard not to think about what will they think. And it's something you need to think about a lot, I think, because you can't please everyone and you will just completely kill your own identity, right? If you constantly are trying to do things to please others. So again, very complex and very nuanced. You've taken a subject that I, thought was pretty simple, but I guess when you think about it, it isn't, because it does involve the human intelligence and the human characteristics, which are so nuanced. So, and I think what I would like to ask you is, now as someone who has just been made aware of the different parts of self-awareness, what should I be doing to be a better self-aware person?
That's an excellent question. And I will answer that by first getting back to what you said around how others are perceiving you. The example that you picked was extremely good for two reasons. The first one was that you mentioned, if my parents were in the audience, it would change my behavior. Absolutely, because you know your parents very well. You know what their expectations are. You've talked to them many times. They will have given you feedback. So you understand what they might be looking for. As you said, they like specific things you say. They dislike other things that you might have planned to say. The other piece is that the rest of your audience, most likely you don't know as well as your parents, meaning that for them, you will start to assume what might they be thinking. Now, the danger with an assumption is that, again, this assumption is solely based on your own understanding. So you might be assuming these people will absolutely love my keynote in the positive direction, and they will have a lot of different questions, and this is how I will end the session. I will be able to give them all the answers they are looking for. Now, that's one assumption. We could, on the other hand, make a different assumption, which could be, oh my God, these people all look very professional, they are all suited up. I am not sure if I can actually serve them well. I don't know if I can meet their expectation. That's another assumption. Now, both are equally true or not true. You will not know unless you ask them. And this is my connection to your question. What can I do to be self-aware or more self-aware? For one, especially when it comes to how do other people perceive me, don't rely on your assumptions. Don't rely on what you believe might be true or might not be true, but much rather ask for feedback. Of course, you cannot ask the entire audience and they might not give you their honest feedback, but on a very frequent basis, ask different people about different aspects, about how you appear, how you speak, how easily they can understand you, for example, how valuable your content is, how confident you come across, all of those things. Or just a very open-ended question, how do I come across in general? And see what they are coming back to you with. For example, I had a situation once where I received the feedback from someone I had met for the first time. They only gave me that feedback a couple months later. But they told me the first time they met me, they thought that I was very arrogant. And I was completely shocked because I thought the last thing that I want to come across as is being arrogant. I want to come across as someone who's super approachable, someone who's very open, someone, who cares, who's helping, who is here to support you, but not as someone who's arrogant. And so at first I thought, this is nothing that I want to hear. I'm going to reject this. Again, then I knew that this is just an old trigger because I used to defend all kind of feedback I didn't want to hear. But then I turned this into curiosity and I asked, how come I came across as arrogant? What made me appear as arrogant? And that person gave me extremely good insights. And so I incorporated that into my self-awareness and I started to change the way how I am appearing, especially when I meet people for the first time. So this is the extremely tricky part about self-awareness, because we might know how we come across, but we won't know for sure unless we are asking other people how we come across in reality. And for the rest of self-awareness, for your cognitive and emotional self-awareness, simply start by going into, we've talked about this before many, many months ago, journaling or self-reflection, especially when it comes to triggers. Find a way how you can very easily document for yourself. For example, oh, this trigger just showed up. And then go a level deeper and understand when this trigger comes up, I am responding in, could be 2 or 3 different ways, this, or this way. What will happen after this, after I responded this way? It could be that I immediately regret what I just said or what I just did. So start to really more or less analyze yourself and start seeing patterns. And then once you've done that, really go one level deeper again to find out, where is that trigger coming from? What triggers that? Is it somebody looking at me in a specific way? Is it an environment? Is it somebody looking a specific way with a specific appearance, for example? Is it a name that triggers me? Is it a word that they are using? Anything like that. So once you have created that awareness, that is when you can then decide for yourself, okay, now this is something that I can change in this or that way. This is something that I'm actually okay with. I don't need to change the trigger. I just need to change my response, for example. So this is a longer process, but the most important part really is to have that willingness to create that awareness. And then you can take it from there. Either you do it autonomously or you do it with someone like me, a coach who can help you and hold you accountable on this journey as well. And then you can set goals for yourself. Through this self-awareness, I actually want to achieve, for example, not to be seen as arrogant anymore the first time I'm meeting people. Through my self-awareness, I want to be able to understand what people really want and what they're expecting, and not just rely on my assumptions. Through my self-awareness, I want to be able to calm myself down quicker. Not to shout, for example, was one of the very first examples that you brought in today. So this is how you can create self-awareness on these 3 different levels.
You know, it's so interesting to hear you talk about this, because it just is a reminder. There is so much work we need to do on ourselves to be able to move forward in the right way. Do you know what I mean? And like, as you were talking, I was thinking, okay, I can do this once, twice, 3 times on my own, but like, it's a lot of work that you need to do on yourself consistently to be able to stay self-aware. And honestly, like, before I met you, I never considered coaching or any of these things. But the more I speak to you, the more I recognize the value of having someone who understands this stuff and actually holds you accountable so that you actually do the work. I mean, I face it in a different way in what I do, because I teach people how to use AI. Again, you can teach it and talk to people about it, but then they have to do the work. And it's, so the support that you can get from someone to actually help you do this can be really invaluable, because it is hard to sit every day with a journal. It is hard to be constantly self-aware. It is hard to constantly go deep, find a space for yourself where you can go deep and think. It's also very hard to ask for feedback, because you also want to be careful who you're asking for feedback. Right? Like, you want to ask somebody who can give you constructive feedback and who you trust, who's not just going to slander you because they don't like something about what you said, right? So it's all so complex, but it all comes down to the fact that when we're thinking about who we want to become, what can we do either on our own or with the support of someone like yourself to move a little forward in being that person we want to become. And now, in this day and age where everything is being thrown at us and everything is moving faster than we can imagine, a lot of triggers, a lot of emotions, a lot of what do we do now is going to come up in all our lives. So I feel like we've just got a masterclass in how to be self-aware from you, Sabine. So thank you very much. And for those of you listening, we hope you found that useful. And that you take a step back today to think about, when was the last time you were self-aware, and what did you do about it, and what can you do differently as you continue to work on who you want to become. Thank you very much for listening, and we'll see you again next month.